So grateful to be in community with everyone. So grateful you're here and that you've been sharing your Friday afternoons with us. So grateful for Sikander for joining us today. Sikander was in between meetings and rushing from one place to another and is able to join us with all the chaos. Thank you. So yeah, I invite folks to drop in the chat or unmute yourself to share your name and where you're from. And I guess I can get started. Welcome. I wanted to share some reflections that I've had over the last couple of days. Our boss, Nargis, who many of you have met through these sessions, said at the beginning of the pandemic that our work when the pandemic is over is to process grief, right? And President Biden named May 11th as like the end of the pandemic crisis. We all know from our own experiences, crisis is still happening in our communities. And I was reflecting on kind of the grief that I've been holding from the pandemic, from losing my mom during the pandemic to just like my life has changed so drastically, grieving what life was like before COVID. And the work now is to for me, is to figure out how to heal and move forward. And I want to say that attending these sessions on Fridays have been a huge part of that healing process for me. So I'll say thank you to Andrea, Michelle, our clinical team, who dreamed up this idea to bring community together every Friday. And yeah, it's been very special. So appreciate being in community with everyone. I'm rambling, so I'm gonna share my screen and show some slides. But I do wanna, share my appreciation, but also spread care and connection to everyone here today. And to I'm holding you in my heart because I imagine you're also holding grief, and that, yeah, we're here together to be there for each other. Okay, let's share my screen and do a little introduction. I'm also sad this is the last presentation for now on our Redefining Suicide Prevention series. And one of our hopes was to bring people together, bring community leaders, bring small business owners who are doing healing work, right? But we may not traditionally think of them as mental health workers or suicide prevention workers, but they are doing the work in our community. And to elevate your voices. Want to do a land acknowledgement. We honor and acknowledge that we are on Ohlone Chochenyo land. I'm here in Oakland. If you'd like to drop in the chat what land you're on. This land was stolen from these custodians and we honor their stewardship and care. We express gratitude and recognition of the forced labor that created what we have today. We welcome all our ancestors, past, present, and emerging. A little bit about CSS. Our mission is to provide a welcoming and safe environment rooted in the belief that our collaboration with clients at every stage of service healing is possible. And our values is that we care from the inside out. With open hearts and minds, we build connections and remain committed to growth to be the best for the people we serve. And our strategic plan works to reduce barriers and stigma when people are trying to access services. We provide various services, including therapy services. We have our 24-hour crisis line. You can reach it by calling 988. We do community education around the community, middle schools, high schools, as well as other mental health agencies. And we provide these services for free. The framework that we use, and I think this is blocking it, is the socio-ecological model of suicide prevention, right? Traditionally, for too long, we've blamed the individual when they're having a problem. if they're having suicidal thoughts, or if they're having depression or anxiety, we blame the individual. And that is not okay. We utilize a socio-ecological framework to acknowledge that suicide prevention is not the work of the individual, that it must happen on the societal and community level. So we're talking about relationships, we're talking about our community support systems, we're talking about society and like the policies, and where funding is prioritized by our leaders, that impacts people's ability to get their needs met. And if your needs aren't met, if you live in a world that keeps telling you that you don't belong, then those suicidal thoughts start to happen. People start to have those suicidal experiences. And so we can change the society that we live in, change the environment that we are in. You know, we can make a world where people want to live, where people want to thrive, where they feel like they belong. And then lastly, our Redefining Suicide Prevention series is winding down, but we continue to provide educational opportunities for the community. Our next one is happening on Wednesday and Thursday in June and Tuesday in July, providing suicide prevention training in a medical setting. So if you have a loved one or a community member that you know who's in the medical field, we can provide some suicide prevention training, and these are all free. May is Mental Health Month too. I want to honor and acknowledge that. Okay, let me stop sharing. I want to do a quick introduction of Sikander. We met at a kid birthday party, for real. We were in between like eating cake and singing happy birthday. We were hanging on the couch, and like I got to get to know Sikander, and like the values and the work that you do, and I was truly inspired. And like I felt this itch. I just wanted wanted you to be part of our community. And when I extended an invitation for you to speak today, I was so excited that you said yes. So I'd like to pass the mic over to you. Would you like to introduce yourself, share a little bit about you and your values, maybe the communities that you've been part of, and how that's led you to do the work you do today?
Yeah, I could do that. Thank you, Ben. So yeah, I'm very humbled whenever when anybody thinks that I have something to say. So thank you for inviting me here, and it's good to see some of the folks in here. A few of the folks who I do know. It's good to see you all in here. And so yeah, I hope folks are able to get something out of today. I'll do a brief introduction, and then I'll dive into the conversation about. I think the title says Urban Peace Movement and Suicide Prevention. And so it'll really be more about what does it mean what is healing and organizing? What way does that constitute a suicide prevention model or support? So I'm from Vallejo, California. That's about 45 minutes away from Oakland, north of Oakland. And, I grew up there and I was pretty ambivalent about things. I was just running around the streets, going to school. I grew up during the hyphy movement, if folks are familiar with that, which I assume most of the folks in the room are. So I was kind of fully engrossed in that space. And it actually, I think it's important to share this because it ties into the conversation we're having today, which is, when I was a senior in high school, I signed up for a program that I thought was just a really easy class to take to get an easy A my senior year. And what this class ended up doing was they taught us like how to do like classroom stuff for a little while, like how to manage a classroom, how to work with students. And then the second half of the year, we served as teaching assistants in a local elementary school. And so for me, that was really my first foray at, community work or like giving back in a way, So and that really impacted me because I never really thought about myself as being somebody who could impact others or even make any kind of difference. So just really going there for an hour and a half every day for 5 days a week or 4 days a week, maybe I think it was, for 6 months, and seeing how much of a difference I was able to make in the lives of those kids. And I maintained relationships with that class and their teachers for about 4 years after that. you know, like just coordinating with their teachers and writing. They would write me letters while I was in school, and I would write them back for different assignments and things like that. But all that to say is that was kind of like my first experience of like of being able to see how powerful one person could be. Um, so from there, I ended up, I got lucky and I got in a special program that landed me at UCLA in Los Angeles. When I was there, after my first year, I got introduced to student activism, and I got really involved with organizing on campus. And, you know, I won't belabor it too much, but I did a lot of really dope organizing, fun organizing on the campus at UCLA. And I made some relationships there that landed me back in Oakland after graduation. I did some time working at Youth Uprising for a total of 6 years. I did 3 years, left, and then came back and did 3 more years. While I was at Youth Uprising, I really did a lot of work around violence prevention, mental health support, and community outreach and events. And there was a year where I did leave there, and I served at SEIU UHW as a union organizer. Outside of that, I've mainly been doing, you know, consciousness raising workshops, like, you know, a lot of like ethnic studies work and a lot of violence prevention stuff within the city of Oakland, primarily at the city level. Now I am currently the deputy director at Urban Peace Movement, which I'll mostly talk about today. There are some other folks that that know me through another organization that I'm working with called Oakland and the World Enterprise. And so I might talk a little bit about what we're doing there as well, because it's all related. So yeah, so that's the quick and dirty bio. I will share too is that we did want this to be more of like a dialogue. So I'm not doing a PowerPoint. There's no like hold your questions to the end. So if anybody does have questions, feel free to raise your hand or feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We're more than happy to you know, have a dialogue throughout the conversation. And so when Ben first asked me to, you know, he said, "Could you come talk to, you know, in our Friday sessions about suicide prevention?" Immediately, what I go to is, well, what is suicide? Where does suicide come from? And I definitely see you all as experts in this subject. And so I'll share what my understanding is. And if anybody wants to correct me or add any additional information, I definitely appreciate it. So to start off, when I think about suicide, I think about this study from, it might have been the first study or one of the early studies about suicide by I think they consider him the father of sociology, Emile Durkheim. And so he talks about, I think this study is from like the late 1800s, early 1900s. And in there, I remember reading that he kind of identified that suicide comes really in four types. There's egotistic, altruistic, anomic, and fatalistic. And the important thing about all of them, I mean, if folks want to Google them, you could Google them. But at the end of the day, what really stood out was that all four types of suicide really all relate back to the social conditions that you're in. And so it kind of, so he maintains that suicide is primarily caused by external factors, meaning forces in our social environment and not internal ones. So there's nothing innate about people that like you're born and then you just decide you want to kill yourself for no reason, other than you just want to die. That there's all these social conditions that we have to deal with, and then the way that you interact with these social conditions could lead you to suicidal ideation or suicide attempts or suicide itself. And so when I think about our social conditions and our social environment, it kind of ties into the way that we approach things at Urban Peace Movement is that, you know, initially the people were having calls to stop the violence after 2006, which was had been the highest homicide rate in the city of Oakland outside of 1992. And people were saying, oh, we need to do something about community violence. And I think if you really understand that community violence, suicide, and all other forms of violence are all really controlled by social factors, that that all violence is really state violence. It's an extension of what happens at the state level. So if the state is violent towards the people, then violence will happen within the people or amongst the people or against the people. So, or against the community. And, you know, I know that even what Ben shared earlier was that, you know, initially suicide was something to be approached about, like there's something wrong with this person. Why is this person trying to hurt themselves? And people weren't really thinking about societal factors, even though this study from Durkheim is from like 1897 or something like that. I mean, Durkheim died in 1917, so it was a really old study. But there was still this push to really blame individuals for suicide and even for homicide violence. People just want to only blame the individuals. Although that doesn't mean we absolve individual responsibility, but it does mean that if we're really honest about wanting to interrupt these cycles of violence, that we have to look at what are the root causes of these problems. So when we think about why would the state be responsible, why is the government responsible, it's because we've agreed, we're in a social contract with the government to provide basic needs and basic supports for people in order for us to be governed. You know, that's like old philosophy, like basics, right? 101. And so the truth is, just like a lot of the work folks who I know in this room and folks who I've talked to in this space and things Ben has shared with me about their work and the work of other folks in the space is that you know, one of the things that we run into a lot is we don't have equitable access to housing, food, healthcare, education, et cetera. Like we could run a whole list of all the things that people don't have access to, and then turn around and wonder like, well, why is crime happening? Why is poverty happening? Why do homicides happen? Why does suicide happen? But the answers are right in front of us, and all of us are on the front line trying to figure out how to interrupt these day-to-day social impacts. While also some of us are also trying to change the policies, right? Like how do we change the social conditions that we exist in? And that's the other part of the work that I do with Oakland and the World Enterprise. The goal there is how do we change the social conditions that we exist in by providing economic opportunities and housing for people who are really the most forgotten by the United States government or the city and the county government even. So because our government doesn't provide resources or even access to resources equally or equitably, it's you could even actually not even make the argument, but it's even factually been documented and it's been proven that the government has not only not provided access equitably or equally, it's also even intentionally deprived communities. There are communities that have been intentionally deprived economic opportunity, denied access to housing, denied access to food, denied access to healthcare, and you know, and so when you deny people these things, on top of not allowing equitable access, but then now going out of your way to redline communities and things like that, and you're intentionally depriving communities, you're really holding people captive in poverty and oppression. And poverty and oppression is, I'll also refer to in this conversation as state violence. And so when these things happen, it really creates conditions that are ripe for crime, ripe for violence. And both of those things lead directly to, those are two of the major sources that lead into both homicides and suicides. And this is prevalent from, you know, a lot of people might try and argue like, that's not the reason this happens. That's not the reason that happens. The government isn't responsible for X, Y, and Z. But there's really no other way to really explain the disparities you see from birth to death. You know, they say from cradle to the grave, right? These disparities we see throughout our lives. And it does start as early as birth. Even if you look at the maternal and infant mortality rates among people in the United States, we have one of the worst in the quote unquote developed world, and then the numbers get you know, the disparities just get so bad when you start to look at Black women and Black babies, right? The infant and maternal mortality rates in those communities are I mean, it's unacceptable, and that's the only way you could explain it is that there's a systemic piece at play here. There's also, when we talk about access to quality and affordable education, there's issues there, access to food, access to housing, access to education, even in hiring. And I don't know if folks are familiar with, I feel like this is a very popular study, but I'll just share it in case there's anybody who hasn't. And this study has been replicated, so you might have heard of it from a different university. The one I heard about it from was the University of Champaign in Illinois. And they did a study where they took job resumes and they ran focus groups and had people identify whether a name sounded Black or a name sounded white. After running through and identifying the names that people were saying, these names, when I read this name, this sounds like a Black name to me. When I read this name, it sounds like a white name to me. Then they sent these resumes out to organizations, the same exact resume, but one would have what appeared to be, or what sounded like a white name, and the other had those that sounded like Black names. And when they sent these applications out, the white applications got twice as many callbacks. And they replicated this study over and over and over again. And you'll see that even when there's white people who are formerly incarcerated or less educated than Black applicants, the white applicants still have a higher callback rate for employment. So, so this is when we talk about systemic racism. It creates a system of institutions that operate in a way that perpetuate racism, classism, sexism, etc. And now you have it where the systems aren't even doing it. It's so ingrained in so many people that you just have random HR managers are operating this way, right? Like they're just determining who gets a call back and who doesn't get a call back. We also see this in the way that, beauty standards. There's the famous doll test where the young girls were looking at dolls, Black dolls and white dolls, and asked to identify which one's a pretty doll, which one's an ugly doll, which one's a nice doll, which one's a mean doll. So in that experiment, you could even see how early the onset of these negative ideas start to manifest in our minds. Did you have something you're going to say, Ben?
I really appreciate all that you're sharing. We are in full agreement of how let's see, I love your question. How do we change the social conditions people live in, right? That is suicide prevention. And I also appreciate your comment about how all violence is started at the state level. And it makes me think a lot about power. And I'd love to hear more from you, about power dynamics and how that influences people's mental health. But I wanted to share a story to highlight the internalized oppression, especially around names. This is a story about me. My name is Ben, right? But I've been on the crisis lines for 18 some years. And when I introduced myself in the past on the crisis line, I would say my name is Ben, B-E-N. And then 10 years ago, we started doing text line, and I was introducing myself, crisis support. This is Ben, B-E-N. And I think it really highlights how like that internalized oppression or like the white supremacy, was a force that like made me feel the pressure to like change my name to like belong or to be taken seriously or whatever. And that is like harmful to a person's sense of self. And so there was a moment in my work on the crisis lines where I intentionally said, no, I'm going to use Bin, B-I-N-H. It's a weird name. That's okay. And like by doing that, it opened up greater doors for conversation with people I was speaking with on the phone and on the crisis lines. One person started talking about how, as a woman of color, they get harmed by the systems that are set up to take care of them. They are harmed by the hospital settings, by social workers. But I don't know if they would have, opened up if they didn't see a part of me that maybe they could connect to. Anyways, just wanted to share some reflections. And I also wanted to invite the audience members too, if you had anything you wanted to add or questions that you had or not.
It's all good. Well, thank you for that, Ben. And that is true. There is a lot of work that we have to do. A lot of people I met in college, especially people with kind of non-traditional Western names, we'd have to do a lot. We actually did a thing. We called it name therapy, and we would get people to reclaim their names, because they would go by nicknames. Like I have a friend whose middle name was Patricia, and she would go by Patricia, but she was Tongan, and she talks to me still about how important it was for us to have those spaces to say, be yourself. And you see in the work that we do how important that is, because there's also from the other side, when you're coming from an oppressed group, it changes the way you engage with systems when the person who might be trying to help you could have all the best intentions, but there's no identification with you, or maybe you don't understand. Like I feel more comfortable with people who I feel like have had similar experiences as me. And so being the difference between Ben could be anybody, but Ben is I'll make an assumption about who Ben is, and I may feel more comfortable. So, if we had more than an hour, we could go much deeper into all the connections of the role of the government, its failures, especially for people of color and for poor people of all backgrounds, even white people, like in the Appalachians, they're probably living some of the roughest lives that we could imagine. Like, it's not like it's good for them out there because they're white, because poor people and classism is that's a part of it too, whether you're white or black or brown. But definitely the experience here in Oakland and the Bay Area is a very like a racial capital experience for sure. And I know that's a global phenomenon, but I don't want to go too deep into that since we only have a limited amount of time. But in short, we do need to recognize that crime, violence, and thus homicides and suicides are the direct result and indirect and indirect result of state violence. And why is this important to know? It's important to know because when we start to talk about healing-centered organizing, this fact that state violence is the cause for these social conditions that create violence, homicide, and suicide, it's the nucleus of how we approach our work. So when we say, what is healing-centered organizing? People know about healing, people know about organizing, but what does it mean to have healing-centered organizing? Healing-centered organizing is important just the same way it is for, it should be for a lot of the folks in the room, because it's become more and more clear that the people that are doing the work to turn things around in our community need to be people from the community, and they need to be people who are impacted and from the community. And so if you're impacted and you're from the community, that means you've probably been, you're dealing with more trauma and more pain and more, you've experienced more or heightened levels of violence from the state. And so the healing is really about addressing the violence that you've incurred from the state. And so we see healing as a necessary aspect of what needs that. It's a necessary action for you to be able to actually organize. And we see organizing as a form of healing. So once you accomplish so much healing, then you can engage in organizing, which is not separate from healing. It actually takes your healing to the next level. And I'll share two examples of that before we close out. And this is really important because in our society, a lot of us are denied human dignity. A lot of people we interact with, they're crushed by the oppressive forces in our society, and we're denied the right to live as proud and free human beings. And I'm going to quote Dr. Huey P. Newton from his book, Revolutionary Suicide, which I feel like is very relevant for me as somebody who's battled depression and battled, things like that could lead to suicide. And I feel like his book is one of the books that really helped me climb out of that space. But he says, when he talks about the external factors and the things that would drive you to suicide, he says, and this is an indirect quote because I'm going to shift the language a little bit to make it more relevant to the language we're using today. But he says, but rather than to give in to these forces, we believe that it is better to fight back against the systems that would lead me and my community into more death and destruction. So rather than just sitting back and letting these things happen and becoming hopeless and dealing with all this despair, there is a way for us, and we believe and we've seen it and we've experienced that there's a way that as doing healing work and doing organizing work, it really shifts you from saying, I don't want to be here anymore, to saying that, no, I deserve more, we deserve more. And then you have a stronger desire to live in order to achieve and get what's rightfully belongs to you, which is your dignity and the right to live as proud and free human beings. The healing practice for us is, this Arena. Yeah. Oh, you got 2 copies. Yeah, that's right. It's always good to have multiple copies. I'm a fan of Bookshare. So you haven't read it, then it's yours. You can hand those books out. Those are things that I feel like I love when people steal books. That's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite things that happens. You steal a book. I think that's a wonderful thing. And so, we had to pay it forward and share the information. So for us, healing comes in, there's definitely different ways for us to do healing. It's a lot of times when you think about oppression, they'll talk about internalized oppression, interpersonal oppression, and institutional oppression. For healing, we like to really focus on two approaches. One is, what does it mean to heal as an individual, and what does it mean to heal as a community? Because when things happen, it impacts the whole community. You know, if there's a homicide, you might not have known the person, but you know the impact that it has. It has a ripple effect on the entire community. And so how do we address those things, you know? And I'll speak, you know, we just did a really large concert in at the lake. This is our second time doing it. And we did it with artists. I'm telling, I mean, we know what the artists talk about in their music. We know how people feel about a lot of the fans of the music of the people we had perform last year and this year. But one of the things that's important for us is to push back on these narratives that people are a specific way. So for us, it's really about leading with love. And we've been able to do that successfully for 2 years. When, I mean, we've been told by, you know, a lot of different people that, oh man, that's going to be a dangerous event. Violence is going up, crime is going up, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. But for us, we lead with such a strong intention. And I'm telling you, we try to think of everything that we can. We have violence interrupters, we have macro, we have MH First, we have paramedics on site, paramedics of color. So we do all these different things to make sure that we have culture keepers. We have all these people who are all working together to coordinate and make sure that everybody's needs at the event are met, whether it's mental health, homelessness, substance abuse. They might not be regular substance abusers. They might have just drank too much at the concert. And so we have all these people in place to really go around and just make sure everybody's doing well. And, you know, there might be people who see opportunities to break windows and stuff like that, where people are watching the concert. We have people out there too, not security, like we're out there with guns or weapons, but we're just out there being present, being visible, letting people know that we see them. And I know Ben was able to make it. I don't know if anybody else in the space was able to make it, but I mean, just talking to people at these events and having them say things like, we need this. This feels like a family reunion. You know, there's a lot of people, we don't get to have stuff like this in Oakland. People don't think that we can handle it. People don't think that we deserve it. And for us, it is really important to say that we do deserve these things. We do deserve to have love. We do deserve to have peace, and we do deserve to have joy. And we can't dictate that we don't deserve those things or can't have those things because you know, police or law enforcement or the news has made us terrified of each other. So, and I know that's even harder for us because if you're in the front lines, I mean, you get to really see a lot of stuff people don't see on the news. And I know that can create more anxiety and more fear. But we also just have to take time for ourselves to really step out and recognize and really connect with all the things that are beautiful around us as we're fighting to change the conditions. So a lot of that is the healing piece on the community side. On the individual side, it's about saying, you know, I know a lot of people push therapy, and that's one of the things that we connect people to if that's something they want to do. But therapy doesn't work for everybody in our community. So sometimes it might be, maybe you want to take a religious approach, a different religious approach that's a spiritual that's different from your religion, or you might want to engage in some Eastern practices. It could be acupuncture, acupressure, Reiki, somatics. There's so many different forms there's so many different forms and practices that could fall under healing for yourself. And it's really about helping people identify what are you going through right now? What have you been dealing with? And what are the different ways we can engage with you to help you address some of these things so you can live, so you can breathe, so you can move forward. And that's really what the individual healing is about. And we'll do that on a one-to-one level, and we even do it on group level. So I'll talk a little bit about our actual programs in a second. But, you know, it does have a lot to do with finding the right space for individuals, creating space for communities. And a lot of this is about preserving and protecting your identity. Who are you? Who can you be? Who can we be? Combating the social constructions of whiteness and the wealthy, right? Those are things we have to deal with on a regular basis. We're often taught that we can't be ourselves, that we can't embrace who we are because it's violent or it is unprofessional. And so we constantly see attacks on our bodies, on our existence, and you know, and we have to push back on those things. And in that also, when we talk about these healing spaces, I know one of the first things that came up to me was whenever I had initially thought about healing back in the day, I used to be like, well, you know, that stuff, just to be frank, I used to be like, oh, all that healing stuff, that's what white people do. But the more you learn about it, all these, almost all, if not all, but a lot of these healing practices all come from ancient, mostly African and then Asian and indigenous and Latin countries. These are ancient practices, and it was really about finding people. Um, you could, there's plenty of practitioners of color, I guess I'll say, um, who do this work, and it is very important to have people who understand the experiences. That's really first and foremost for me. Do you understand the experience? If you can understand the experience, then you could get around race and class a lot of times. But really, the best thing is if racial connection, class connection, and then understanding the experiences. Those are things you can't train. You can't train those into people. And so it is important for us to be able to step out and be those people. And then also, as we're moving on in our careers, how we help and create space for new people to come in and serve in those roles to really connect with the people that need the support. So that's the healing practice work, just kind of like a general overview. And the way that serves as suicide prevention is because we're saying, well, what have these social what's happened to you? What have the social conditions done to you? What has the state done to you? We're not saying that exactly, but it is about diving in and say what are the things that have impacted you and how are they impacting you? And let's explore the different ways that we could do that individually and as a group, right? Group work, community based, coming to these events. Like, I mean, there's people that are at a music concert, it's Yuckmouth and D-Lo, and people are coming up to me and they're in tears. And it's not because of the music, it's because they're looking around and they're saying, wow, I didn't know we had a community. Like, I didn't know we could have spaces like this, or I knew we could have spaces like this, but we just so seldom get to see them. So it's beautiful to be in those spaces when we're able to be in those spaces. I mean, and I'm doing security at the event or culture keeping at the events. So I'm not even like fully like sitting there. And I'm talking about at least, 30 people will come up to me and say something like that at some point throughout the event while I'm running around. Ben saw me. Ben had to flag me down because I was running up the hill to go grab some stuff or go help with parking, right? So that's the healing side. The community organizing side is really about saying, okay, so once the healing has gotten, because we also don't want to throw people into organizing or into the work, because without any healing, like a lot of times you could end up being more traumatized, right? There's vicarious trauma, right? Or like, what they call it, secondary trauma or transference. Like, you're working with people that are going through things that you haven't really dealt with yet. And all that's going to do is it's really going to tear you up slowly. A lot of us try to be tough. A lot of us have to have been tough to survive. A lot of us have to be the tough ones in our family and carry everybody through every crisis. But, it'll wear you down over time. And so it is important for us to find spaces to say, how can we heal? Because it'll make you a much better organizer. It'll make you a much better service provider. So for us, the service provision is just like organizing, like it gives you power. It lets you know that you can make a difference. And so for us, when we're organizing, it is about letting people know that you can have a voice and exercise power in decision making that directly impacts you and your life, and it directly and indirectly impacts you and the people around you in your community. And so I'll share our programs. I'm going to share two quick stories about how that's happened. We have a program called LIT, which is Leaders in Training, which is a high school-based program for young people who are directly impacted and systems impacted, meaning that they've either been in juvenile hall or they have family members in juvenile hall who have been incarcerated. And in these programs, we get them involved in our criminal justice reform campaigns. And I'll share those in a minute. But a lot of it is about creating spaces for them to learn about healing practices and engage in healing practices with them. And then also having them engage in learning the ins and outs of organizing and how to participate in campaign work. The second program, we have two LIT programs. One's in Oakland, one's in South County in the unincorporated area, Ashland, Cherryland. DMBG is Determination Black Men's Group. That's a group for young Black men who are formerly incarcerated, who in the age range of that group is 16 to 26. So I think in this space, they would say that's the Tay age range. We also have some guys that are older that come to the group because they just love to be there. And a lot of times they serve as kind of like informal mentors in the space, like they just say, I want to come and I want to I want to engage in intergenerational conversations. to let them know about things I wish I would have known about when I was younger. So we do those. Both of those programs meet every week. The Black Men's Group meets on Wednesdays. The Leaders in Training high school programs, those run through the school year. And then we do summer programming with some of the young people who want to do summer programming. And our campaigns that we've been running for the last few years have been the Free Our Kids campaign. We've been a part of that coalition. So a lot of this is about coalition building. So we don't do any of this ourselves. And the young people learn this as well. How do you build coalitions, and how do you coordinate within a coalition? Free Our Kids is really about reimagining youth justice and identifying that not identifying, but I guess really just getting people to really admit the facts that we know, that incarceration doesn't really help anybody. Incarceration has not reduced any trauma or improved the conditions in our community. All it really does is increase trauma, and it does all kinds of damage to people. It makes it almost impossible to get back into school. We know we have a lot of reentry service providers. Your whole job is like, this kid gets out of juvenile hall, how do I get them back in school and get them caught up on the last X amount of time that they've missed, when they were already probably behind before they went in, because nobody just goes to jail because of no reason. You're usually coming out of social conditions that have not been conducive to you learning in these educational environments in the first place, and the educational quality is also not even up to par in the first place. So you're already starting behind. So for us, it's saying, well, how do we shift funding over to say, these young people need support, they need housing, they need food, they need more, but we're giving them less. And then rather than spending $800,000 a year on incarcerating these young people, why can't we take that funding and say, hey, let's provide more support services. Let's see, we could even do an assessment, identify what they need, and then start to build out the things that they need in order to do better. And even if it's not necessarily just them personally, maybe their family needs some type of support that could really help turn them around and really help turn the tide on the trajectory of this young person's life. And so that's a lot of the work that's happening in Free Our Kids. But we're so far behind in our fight for justice and freedom. Like one of our main campaigns recently has just been pushing in that direction that I just shared, is saying, well, how do we get them to stop using chemical sprays and prone restraints on children in juvenile hall? Like all around the country, you'll see different organizations and institutions are ending the use of chemical sprays and prone restraints on children. They're using them in schools. They were using them in schools for students who had special needs, and they're banning them because they're literally killing children by using prone restraints. But these are still allowed. They still allow the use of prone restraints and chemical sprays on children in juvenile hall in Alameda County. And it is a county by county issue, but the fact that that's even a fight says something else. So that's some of the work we're doing there. And the goal there is to really move away from youth prisons as much as possible, even if it's possible exclusively, so that we can really focus on having support services, increasing housing, increasing mental health support, increasing crisis support, and really providing people the resources and support that they need. Like I know the folks in this room are definitely in the thick of it. So you guys all know what I'm talking about. The next one is a DA accountability space. And that was really about pushing the DA to not focus on punitive crimes or not focus on punitive punishments. Like there's a lot of areas, and we know this because the DAs often enact discretion. And we've seen this in disparities around sentencing. So we want to just make sure that, one, we're getting a fair shake, that there is some type of accountability, but we also know that the only way to really reduce crime and reduce violence is by putting in measures of accountability that change behavior. And so that's really the big focus there, is saying, well, how are we going to actually change behavior? Because I know people that go to jail and they come out and they're right back in the mix of things because nothing has been offered to them. There's no type of support or any type of engagement they've had that's encouraging them to, or providing a reason for them to change their behavior. So our DA accountability work is really about pushing forward whatever we could do to end the carceral state, to minimize the use of the prisons and jails as a prevention and intervention method, because that's really, when we're talking about crime, violence, homicide, suicide, you have prevention, intervention, and response. And prevention and intervention have been the areas that have suffered the most, because fear mongering has taken place and they've sent all the money into a response. response to homicides, response to crimes, response to suicides, but we really need to put more resources in the prevention side, because these are things that don't even need to happen in the first place if we can get the right amount of resources there. And all of this is really built around, like I said, which I'm borrowing from Dr. Huey P. Newton, is strengthening a strong desire to live with hope and human dignity. And that's what we want to do. We want to strengthen that desire for people to live with hope and human dignity, and just the ability to be a proud person, and a lot of that is stripped from us from the moment we're born, and we have to fight to get that back every day. And so I'll just close us out. I know we're almost at time, so I'll leave some time at the end for reflections, or leave some time at the end for questions, or we could just end early. But I just want to clarify, because a lot of times people hear stuff like defund the police or reimagine justice or reimagine youth safety. And I think a lot of times people aren't really clear about what that actually means. So reimagining just means redirecting resources to create equity and redirect funding away from response and reactionary means that are actually the most expensive and the most violent. So like I said, incarceration only creates more problems, disconnection from education, separation and breakdown of families, additional financial constraints because you have fines, fees, restitutions, calls, which are now supposed to be free, visitations, like imagine you got to go visit somebody all the way out in Folsom, like none of these prisons are closed. You got to damn near take a whole day off. Like this all putting money on people's books. Like it really creates more financial strain on families that are most all dealing with poverty already. Increased challenges finding employment. Like it's like if you got incarcerated because you were, coming out of a difficult situation, now you have a felony, and now it's even harder for you to find employment. It's harder for you to do right with your life after you get out of jail. And then I'd say, it's like I said, increased trauma. The amount of trauma that happens in prisons and jails is, I don't even know how to explain it. You just have to Google it, and I'll just say trigger warning, because everything you read and everything you see, if it doesn't bring you to tears, I don't know what to tell you. And we also know that policing doesn't create safety. It's a response to crime. A crime happens, then the police respond. I could share growing up, I had a lot of experiences of police abuse and police harassment myself, from my personal self, my family, my friend groups. And, it's 2023, and we're still seeing things on the news every day. The institutions have not changed at all, even with the past 10 years of, protests and screaming, from Oscar Grant to Trayvon Martin to Eric Garner to George Floyd. And we're still dealing with the same things from police. And now we're even seeing an increase in vigilante attacks on people, specifically Black people, to address crime and address violence. And it's being supported by the state. Like you'll see in San Francisco, I don't want to get too political in the space, but, we're seeing what's happening there. The video was released, and I think it's very clear what happened, and what the state does and what the DA does tells you how they feel about your life and your value and your worth. OPD's last budget cycle, I know we're going through the budget cycle right now again, and I'll just remind people that when you want a concrete number about how things are prioritized, right? They say, how do you know what the priority is? You can see, look where the money is at. So OPD's last cycle, they got over $360 million for their budget for the year. The Department of Violence Prevention was only awarded $17 million in that same budget cycle. OPD got $360 million. The Department of Violence Prevention got $17 million, which is only maybe 5% of what the police got. And they only got $17 million because we fought to redirect $10 million from OPD's increase, not from their budget, but from their increase, to the Department of Violence Prevention, which was originally going to be funded at, I think, $7 or $8 million. And so, yeah, I mean, that just kind of tells you right there, like, what are the priorities? What do we really focus on? What do we actually expect to happen? And then when violence happens, they turn around and point fingers at the Department of Violence Prevention or at programs, when the reality is, we're operating on shoestring budgets. And the police, when they're successful, they get more money. When they're not successful, they say it's because they didn't have enough money and they get more money. Because even that $10 million of the increase that was shifted over to the Department of Violence Prevention, 3 months later was reinstated by the city council. So OPD got not just what they were originally asking for, but they got more than they originally were hoping to get in the mayor's original budget proposal last budget cycle. So, that's just to share, just to put some context. Police get $360 million. The Department of Violence Prevention that same period was at $17 million. So reimagining and defund, whatever the language we're using is, just remember the end goal is really what's important. And that's to say, how do we redirect resources or increase the amount of resources that are dedicated to creating equity and funding prevention and intervention services like housing, economic opportunities, mental health support, crisis services, education, education and schooling for, children 0 to 5. Like, these are the type of things we need in our community, because these are the type of things that globally have been proven to create healthy and thriving societies. So that's my everything I had today. I'll pause here if anybody has any questions about anything I said, or you could ask about something I didn't even speak about, any questions in general, or you could just talk to Ben for 5 minutes. But thank you all so much for coming in today. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you again for having me. Thank you.
They came here for you, Sikander. We want to invite folks to ask questions or things they want to explore more. If you don't have one, I have a question. What keeps you going when, like, the forces of oppression and the state are so powerful, and like it's always like we can never win, right? Our side can never win. We're always just trying to catch up, trying to undo harm. How do you stay hopeful? What keeps you going?
I think it's the idea that we can, is that it's not, I don't believe that we're hopeless. I believe that there is hope. I believe that we can see a better tomorrow. And like I said, that Dr. Huey P. Newton's book, Revolutionary Suicide, says you can call it quits and just say that, hey, this is where we are. We're not going to move we're not going to move forward anywhere. He even talks about a spiritual death, where people who act like they're not engaged, they're just kind of living their day-to-day lives with no real idea that there's hope. But deep down inside, they all really do hope for change. They're just finding ways to cope with the reality, because it does seem overwhelming. But I think for me, it's saying that if I would as quickly as throw my life away through suicide, why would I not just rather dedicate my life to improving the conditions for myself and for my people around me, and the people in my community? So I think for me, that's how I keep myself going, is that, and it's, and like I said, that book, to strengthen my desire to live, because I said, well, I could be hopeless and give up, or I could live a meaningless life and just do just nothingness and just kind of accept conditions the way they are, or I could strengthen my desire to live by engaging and organizing and doing direct service, and just participating in a movement that outdates all of us. We're part of a legacy of leaders who've been fighting and clawing from Frederick Douglass to Marcus Garvey, Booker T. Washington, all the way down to Nat Turner. Like, it's and it even predates that. Like, there was I was lucky enough to go to Ghana 3 months ago, and I was able to sit down and engage with people in the Ashanti tribe, who fought the British off for 150 years, who were coming to the shores of Africa to kidnap people. So there's a long legacy that's thousands of years old, fighting white supremacy, fighting capitalism, and it's I feel honored to be a part of that legacy.
Ed raised his hand. Ed, do you want to go? We got 3 minutes together.
No, I'll be real quick. Yeah, this was really powerful, and we just had some trainings just now with some of the staff that I work with on cultural humility and de-escalating aggressive behaviors and whatnot. And what's jumping out to me is that it's really important for people to humble themselves and to know that they're not the experts of culture, because it leads to like oppression, stereotypes, misogyny, all those like things. And so even people within your own household, like, you're not the expert of their own culture. And so like those studies that you were citing and stuff, it raises awareness of the fact that there are like a lot of stereotypes, and they're formed by like these misconceptions and misunderstandings that we have of one another. And so like, like the 5 components of cultural humility are like, cultural awareness, like knowledge, skill, desires, and encounters. And so like when the more exposure that we have to people who aren't necessarily like similar to us, and even if we think we still have the same culture, we don't. Like, we have to like change how we look at culture, what culture is, and really just deepen our understanding and say that, yeah, there is such a thing as culture, but you can't paint a broad brush and just say that like everybody from a certain community is the same, or everybody that even your own household is the same, because we also like form our own cultures and stuff like that based on the people we kick it with, based on like certain groups and stuff like that that we choose to identify with. Like even what you were saying about your journey going from high school to where you are now to UCLA, that's an example of what I'm talking about, right? That we change, culture changes, how we see the world changes. So I say that all to say that like the more that we practice that cultural humility and not like stereotype ourselves and stuff and in others, it will help create like a deeper and better understanding of society and of one another.
It's beautiful, Ed. Thank you. Anyone else? Well, much appreciation to you, Sikandar, for sharing your afternoon with us. Thank you, everyone who's been part of our series for the past 3 months. And I want to wish everyone peace, love, and joy. Take good care.